Our energy mix is evolving, and so is the world in which energy is supplied and consumed. Major progress is being made in developing natural gas, oil, renewable, and other energy sources, and we're also making great strides in energy efficiency. But the increase in population, coupled with the industrialization of developing countries, will cause energy demand to increase significantly. The international community is grappling with the trade-offs between development and the environment, and concerns over climate change have fundamentally changed the nature and urgency of the debate. Historically, it required decades to explore and produce known energy resources, and much longer to develop the technology for new ones. So what is a realistic view of the energy mix over the next 30 years, and what are the roles for fossil fuels, renewables, and nuclear?
We are developing new technologies to be able to recover oil, not from deposits under the ground in traditional reservoirs that we're used to doing, but from the actual source rock. And that has been such an innovative change that we were all just arguing among ourselves about how big or significant it will be. But it does definitely change the dynamic of thinking about climate change and thinking about our energy mix going forward, because when we thought we were running out of oil and gas, then there was this presumption that we'd get to the point where oil and gas would be just so expensive that we would all know that we're going to shift to something else and we could pick a cleaner fuel, and a fuel that would be more helpful to the process of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and so forth. So the good news and the bad news is, the good news is here in the United States, we have 350 million cars on the road. They're liquid fuel cars. We're not about to run out of the kind of material we need to make the fuel for those cars anytime soon. The bad news is, if we want to move to a different policy that has a different orientation, we're going to have to be purposeful. It's not going to happen naturally just because certain kinds of energy are no longer available. We're going to have a conscious policy that we want to move to cleaner fuels, and we're going to have to take that policy into account the fact that we have what I call incumbent infrastructure. We have lots of oil refineries. We have lots of gasoline cars. We don't have so many factories that are making alternative kinds of fuels or cars. And therefore, if we want to shift that, that is going to take a conscious policy where we're all going to have to make a commitment, and that commitment is going to be both financial, and that commitment is going to have to be about our lifestyles.
Right now, if you buy in the United States a solar home system, solar panels for your roof, and I hope a lot of people in the room have them, and an electric vehicle, it's now cheaper to run your car and your home off of solar from your roof than it is to run your house off of the power from the grid and to buy gasoline. I'm leaving out the price of the vehicle, but they're not that different in cost that you can't envision a transition happening here. So these same companies that at one time we were trying to pit, or we were pitting, environmentalists versus big oil and gas companies, that's now, I would say, a false argument. We have opportunities that dramatically change that equation. In under a decade, China went from a player to the largest producer of batteries for electric vehicles and solar panels and wind turbines. Are some of those companies in trouble today? Absolutely. Are some of those companies that Matt and others at Department of Energy invested in struggling to keep up with incredible price changes? Yes. Part of that is sorting out which technologies and which governments are providing the right enabling environment. And so when I model the energy mix both in the Western United States and in China, where we have big models in my lab at Berkeley, we find that the price numbers are, both places could meet very dramatic green energy goals. For the climate experts, dramatically decarbonized energy systems, consistent with where California wants to go, where Europe wants to go, where Korea and Australia want to go, not by 2050, the point that we've been thinking about, but by 2030. But the thing is, it takes a coordination of investment in new clean tech technologies and in the grid. And so getting a mixture of policies and financial incentives that facilitates that transition is really a stumbling block. Now, California has an amazing mixture, and the last 3 governors have handed off from one to the next a really innovative portfolio. Our climate bill, AB 32, The Pavley-Nunez bill is an amazing piece of that, but it's not the only one. There's remarkable vehicle features. We have a mandate for 1 million solar roofs and 1 million vehicles, 1 million electric vehicles. That's a wonderful synergy that I talked about a second ago. And there's lots of other examples like that out there.
Over the last 4 years, we've seen the price of solar go from essentially $9 per watt peak down to, I think you can do about $250 per watt peak here installed. And so that kind of dramatic change opens up the marketplace in fundamentally different ways. But the key issue, and Dan was talking a little bit about it, is understanding where the break point is. So in our analysis of solar in the United States, even at 250 watt peak, we're less than 1% of the roofs really want to have solar on them. But at $1.50 a watt peak, we're at 17%, and at $1 a watt peak, we're at 25%. So the market all of a sudden is much larger. Same thing if you look at batteries. So today, in 2009, a battery cost about $1,000 per kilowatt hour for the battery. Today, you can buy it for about $450 a kilowatt hour. And at that rate, you probably end up with 5 or 6% electric and hybrid vehicles because they're really good fashion statements and they have really good acceleration. And that's why people buy those vehicles today. At 250 a watt peak, all of a sudden, every car wants to have one, because it's a much cheaper source and it's a more efficient engine than a traditional internal combustion engine is. It's just a more efficient way of driving a car. So you put it on there as a way to get better acceleration and better range really cheaply. So if you go forward now in this marketplace, we have this great competition between and among these technologies that are all coming down at a rate that is unprecedented, again, in the last 125 years in energy. 125 years ago, Edison and Westinghouse figured out effectively how to build our electric system. And for the last 125 years, we deployed that set of technologies. We're now at a point where we are inventing another set of technologies, combining industrial technologies with information technologies that make our previous assumptions about what cost levels need to look like obsolete, and in many ways change the fundamental relationship structure around. So if you look at the United States today, there are now 22 states that have significant oil and gas production, and that's expanding all the time, significantly more than coal. It used to be that coal had many more states involved than oil and gas does. Now it's the other way. Now it's the other way around. Today, there are not that many states where solar is a big deal. Again, if we get the price down, solar ends up being a big deal in many, many places. And so we change the relationship structure. And at the end of the day, the hardest thing of this is to try to be anything like a forecaster in energy, because again, the range of uncertainty out there, if you look at reputable folks looking at, say, renewables production in 2030, the range of forecasts out there is somewhere between 25% of the world and 67% of the world. Right? The range of outcomes on electric vehicles is something like between 5% and 65% of vehicles have some form of battery in them. And that kind of uncertainty is very, very hard for policymakers. It's very hard for economists. But what the market is doing now is incredibly powerful. And if the most interesting debate within our firm today is between a European audience who had a set of policy solutions and the US, which now has a bountiful natural gas. And you see carbon numbers coming down in the United States and going up in Europe as Europe imports US coal. So we're in a very uncertain time, but one that is fundamentally optimistic, driven by this fundamental change in the way technology is evolving.